Paris, it's absolutely great to get a chance to chat with you today, and I want to start off by saying thanks for joining us from Madrid. So, for those on the webinar that have seen previous webinars associated with this program series of webinars for the I2M program that focus on a range of topics. And so the topics have included things like what are the top 10 things you should look for in a venture capitalist, or what are some of the specific tips to getting funding, right? And in this case, we're going to be talking about something that's really important for entrepreneurs to understand, and that is the topic of resilience, specifically personal resilience. And so, as Anita had mentioned, I am a professor in the School of Engineering at Stanford, and serve as academic director for a lot of our entrepreneurship and venture capital training programs. But Paris, why don't you introduce yourself to us in a little more detail, specifically talking about IE, if folks aren't familiar with the IE Business School, Venture Lab, what you're doing at Venture, and then after that we can talk a little bit about your journey and history of personal resilience.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. IE Business School is a top 20 business school in the world, and we're based in Madrid. We probably have some of the highest diversity rates of any school in the world. About 95% of our students are not Spanish, and classes are in English. The Entrepreneurship Center, which I run with the Venture Lab, is #1 in Europe for business schools, and we're ranked about 4 or 5 in the world. So we take entrepreneurship very seriously. The Venture Lab, I've been running the Venture Lab for the last 12 years. Over 1,500 startups have come through the Venture Lab in the last 12 years. We have about close to a couple hundred every year. And so essentially what we find is that about 30% of our alumni, from 25 to 30%, actually become entrepreneurs. So yeah, we do drink the Kool-Aid here. We push people beyond their boundaries to think like entrepreneurs, and a lot of them, they get the bug in them, and by the time they graduate, they want to become entrepreneurs, or 2 or 3 years down the line. And so it's pretty serious stuff. And the Venture Lab works across the school, undergraduates, in the technology school, the Masters in Management, the MBAs. So yeah, it's a pretty busy lab, and I can say it's been a hell of a roller coaster ride over the last few years, and especially during the pandemic, we found that more and more people wanted to become entrepreneurs.
Yeah, indeed, we're certainly seeing the same things here, and once again, I want to thank you for joining us from a little bit later in the day for you. It's really this access to world-class global experts that I think makes the I2M program specifically really special, and your involvement in it as one of the instructors and also one of the participants in our webinar series really special. So I want to first take a minute and focus on your personal journey, because the work that you've done to try to help entrepreneurs understand this idea of resilience and mindset is not one that is purely academic in nature, even though you are a faculty member at a world-class business school. It's one of a personal journey from you as well. And so I think it'd be helpful to take a few minutes to talk about that personal journey that you've had to get to this point, and then we can jump off into some of the findings that your research and our collaborative work to date have resulted in.
Okay, yeah, you're right. I'm not your typical academic. Actually, my background is I grew up in LA, and I decided to go to school in Boston. I went to BU, Boston University. I did my bachelor's in mathematics there, and then I got my master's work in computer science there. And so as you can see, when I graduated, I was pretty much a nerd. I hated uncertainty in my work, and I also hated it in my personal life. I always tell the story of my first girlfriend, Bonnie. I was 17, and she actually left me because she said I was too boring and too predictable. She said, I always used to call her at 8 o'clock. And I was like, well, what time do you want me to call you? And she says, well, can't you call me at like 8:15? That might actually create some excitement in our lives. And yeah, so I was pretty nerdy. And it was then that I realized that, when you're nerdy and you don't like uncertainty in your personal and your professional life, it's got, ramifications. And so what I saw very clearly, when I got my first job, and when I graduated in programming, I saw very clearly that I needed to find a way to understand business better. I had to unnerd somehow. And I got really lucky. A colleague of mine from Harvard that was just across the river there, he called me up and he said, Paris, I'd like you to come to New York City and work with me. I'd like you to run the sales desk in my real estate investment firm. And, I said, sales? I mean, I'm a nerd. I can't do sales. And so he took me through this incredible training program, which I'm not going to bore you with tonight, but you can read about it in my thesis and or some other TEDx's that I've done. But essentially, he put me through a 6-month training program that unnerded me. I was forced out of my comfort zone repeatedly, and that I realized then that it was like a muscle. The more you stretch this muscle of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and trying to understand other forms of business. Essentially, what I was doing is, before, since I was so obsessed with certainty, I saw fear. I had fear with uncertainty. Now, for the first time after this training program, I saw opportunity in uncertainty. And that's truly what differentiates an entrepreneur from most people.
Well, and this is I guess a little of a prelude into what we're going to be talking about in these foundations of entrepreneurship. Is this mindset of, is it opportunity or is it fear of uncertainty, and how you view this? And we'll get to those in a little bit. So you're in New York. You've done this training program. I guess I would say nothing wrong with being a nerd. It's a wonderful way to get great jobs and have a wonderful life. But yeah, it's a different. So you do this training, then what happens?
Well, I joined his investment firm, his real estate investment firm, and I was only there for 6 months when I got a call from Wall Street, and some guy at Union Bank of Switzerland says to me, "Listen, we've heard you're a pretty good salesman," and I said, "Wow, all the way in Wall Street." And so, I went to see them. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I went back to my boss. I said, "What do I do?" And he said, "Listen. You've done your bit here, your future's in banking." And that started my career in investment banking. I spent the 80s in New York City, and you probably read a lot of those books, Liar's Poker and the rest. Those were the most amazing years in New York City. I was not a nice person during those years. I got to admit that.
There was also a movie with Michael Douglas and some other things about that time. Right. And so, yeah, a very interesting time in Wall Street.
I was not a good guy during those years. And so after 10 years in New York doing investment banking, I ended up in London at ABN AMRO Bank, also doing investment banking. And then I became 42 in 2002, and I decided I'd had enough. I became what I call a Friday person. And, I tell this a lot to my students. I think there are two types of people in the world: Friday people and Monday people. And, whenever I've always loved Mondays because I love what I do. And, the reality is that 40% of our life is work. So if you don't love what you do, I mean, that's a sad reality. But the reality is that most people are Friday people. I mean, you look at them and on Thursdays, they're smiling because they're looking forward to the weekend. And so I became a Friday person in 2002, and I decided I got to get out of this racket. And I was very lucky to get the call from Sony in Japan. They said to me that Manchester United had canceled their friendly match, and they were looking for an entrepreneur to, bring European football teams to Japan. Now, I knew nothing about soccer, football, and as an American, I didn't even like soccer. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I said to myself, this is it. This is my opportunity. And I went to my wife, and I said, "Honey, I'm leaving the bank." And she said, "Oh, really? Where are you going? Goldman Sachs? Morgan Stanley, maybe?" And I said, "No, I'm going to become a sports marketing professional." You should have seen her face. Well, that started my 8-year sprint as an entrepreneur. I had 5 startups, one in sports, did pretty well. One in an advertising agency, lost a lot of money. A renewable energy one, that did well. A CRM company software, that did well. And then I also did the first person shooter game on Xbox Connect, video game. That was a disaster. I lost a fortune on that one. And so after 8 years of being an entrepreneur, I became a Friday person again. I got fed up. I said,
I think it's really important that folks on the call also hear from successful academics, successful entrepreneurs, that not everything is a series of successes. And in many regards, entrepreneurship is a resilience exercise in understanding how to learn from failure and see failure as a growth opportunity just as much as it is the ability to move on to the next thing. So I appreciate you honestly sharing the fact that, you know what, that failed and it was a flaming disaster. And so that's really important. Thanks for sharing.
And you learn.
Keep going. So you're startups.
And so, I decided I was going to become a professor. And you should have seen my wife's face when I told her, honey, I become a Friday person again. I want to teach. And she looked at me and said, Paris, most people, when they change careers, they make more money. And you have gone, from being an investment banker where we were rich to being an entrepreneur where we didn't know when the next paycheck was coming, to being a professor where we know that paycheck is going to be very small.
Yeah, where we know there's no paycheck coming.
Exactly. And so for the last 12 years, I've been here at IE, running the Venture Lab and working alongside the Entrepreneurship Center. But the big thing that really pertains to this talk is my thesis. I decided, and I had to get a PhD because, if you want to be a teacher, you got to be a PhD. Otherwise, they're going to look at me and say, you're just some ex-investment banker. And so my thesis director at the time, I got my PhD in Spain, in Barcelona at ESADE. My PhD director was from Brown University, and he said to me, listen, you need to find a topic that you can relate to. And essentially, when I told him the story of my life, he said, listen, you've got to talk about the relationship that we have with uncertainty. And essentially, I studied nerds. I studied those people that struggle with ambiguity, that are obsessed with certainty. And I got to the point where I was able to understand the difference between one's relationship with uncertainty in their personal life and their professional life. And so I look at myself. I haven't changed a lot in my personal life. I'm not a nerd, but I'm more nerdy than not. But in my professional life, ever since I did that training program back then, I just embrace uncertainty. And that's why I think this talk of resilience in entrepreneurship is really critical.
And I think this talk of resilience and entrepreneurship, particularly as it stretches into our personal lives, is even more important right now during the pandemic, when there is indeed a lot of uncertainty related to our professional lives. And for those that are entrepreneurs, that level of uncertainty is always there. But you layer that on with increased uncertainty in our personal lives. And I would imagine, and I know this to be the case, for many entrepreneurs, it's overwhelming, because where you seemed to have control and less uncertainty in your life, and I know in our previous discussions, you've talked about this balance between being okay with uncertainty in one aspect of maybe your professional life, but needing less uncertainty in your personal life to provide that balance. During the pandemic, that control over the level of uncertainty in our personal lives has indeed been taken from us. And that's why this topic today of developing resilient mindsets for entrepreneurs, I think is so important.
Totally, Mike. And back to the pandemic, what we have seen, and in the research that we've done, we've seen that very much during the pandemic, we've been forced to get more comfortable with uncertainty. We've been forced to feel less fear about it. It was like a train wreck, hitting us at the beginning of the pandemic. But at the same time, we're looking for less uncertainty in our personal lives. I mean, I had a student of mine, an undergraduate, and I'll never forget this guy. He was German. And before the pandemic, I mean, the guy was like partying like crazy. And, you know, one of his projects that he wanted to build was a dating app because he thought that dating apps, you know, had not advanced enough. And so the pandemic hits, and, you know, after lockdown, we come back, we start having online classes, and I see the guy completely pivot his dating site. And I go like, well, so what's going on here? He says, I'm going to build a site that actually is going to help couples create serious, long-lasting relationships. The guy is 18. And I'm asking him, so what are you looking for in a relationship? And he says, commitment. And I'm like, what does commitment mean for an 18-year-old? And so, I mean, that's an extreme example, but so many people, they either bought a pet. I mean, why did pets go like crazy? I mean, pets became family members during the pandemic. You know, everybody was searching for more meaning in their lives during the pandemic, and they were trying to reflect on what was important to them. I mean, we've come out of this much richer as humans. We've come out of this, you know, having a better, sense of what's important and what isn't with respect to our personal lives, and that's moved us, you know, far to the left in terms of wanting more certainty in our lives. But professionally, it's been like a train wreck, as I said. And so, you know, what we're seeing is more and more people are embracing uncertainty now, and they're realizing that they have to, and they have to see opportunity in it. But that's going to take resilience, because this is all about fear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so one of the things that we absolutely want to do with every single one of our webinars in this series related to I2M is leave folks with something of really high value. And often we find that to be things like checklists, things like small little guidelines, something simple they can walk away from and trying to improve who they are as an entrepreneur. Because, you know, within our programs, we're really focused on frameworks. We're really focused on giving people tools for how they should think. We can't answer every question an entrepreneur would have. Everybody's different. And so, therefore, sort of these small tools and frameworks to help folks think about what they're doing is what we really like to focus on, because we find that to be a fundamentally sound way to teach entrepreneurship. And so, you know, we've talked about 5 underpinnings of entrepreneurial resilience. And so I'm going to sort of walk us through these 1 through 5. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you think each one of these is so important, from the work you've done, your personal history, the research you've done at IE, and your experience at Venture Lab. And so the first one, and it's one we've alluded to already in some regards, is the first underpinning: see opportunity in uncertainty. The entrepreneur has to see uncertainty as a source of opportunity, not a source of fear. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that, and some examples where you've seen folks, including yourself, do that effectively?
Okay, and this is a very important point. I like to put it in the context of your comfort zone. You know, we've heard forever people say, get out of your comfort zone. But everybody struggles with that. And why do they struggle with it? Because inherently, they don't want to change as a person many times. And so if you were able to disconnect the personal from the professional, it would be a completely different story. If now I ask you, get out of your professional comfort zone, you're like, sure. What do I have to do? You want me to speak in public? You want me to go down the hall and, you know, talk to a stranger and, you know, find out about, you know, hang out with the marketing people if I'm, you know, a bit of a nerd? So you can deal with that. But if I ask you, get out of your personal comfort zone, and you're a nerd and you're on the dance floor and I'm telling you to go up to some girl and like ask her for a dance, that's a completely different story. And so since this is all about fear, we can manage our professional fears. It's very difficult to manage our personal fears. And
I think
so,
this bifurcation of personal and professional, and saying, look, you can stay who you are and true to yourself, authentic, while allowing yourself to grow. And by separating these, giving people the freedom to embrace uncertainty. One of the questions that came in from the audience is, what tactic can help us embrace uncertainty? I think you just provided one. Bifurcate
totally.
the way you think about uncertainty.
Bifurcate. Anchor. You need to anchor who you are. Okay. Now, you were saying earlier that what we found the balance here. We've studied over 20,000 people over the last 10 years, and we have found that 80% of the people who embrace uncertainty in their professional life, entrepreneurs, innovators, they're nerds in their personal life. They don't like uncertainty. The late Steve Jobs, he denied uncertainty in his personal life. He embraced it professionally. Guys like Mark Zuckerberg, Richard Branson, all these guys, they're more nerdy in their personal lives, and they're embracing it professionally. So the reality is that we look for our balance in our lives. And so that makes total sense. But the sad thing today, and this is one of the key messages for young people, is that if you're nerdy, if you're like introverted, you're shy, society and your parents, everybody's telling you you should maybe be an engineer or be a mathematician or an auditor. But the reality is that if you are nerdy in your personal life, you have a better chance of going crazy in your professional life and being a leader or an entrepreneur or a unicorn founder, you name it.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so the first one, see opportunity in uncertainty, and an important part of that, as best you can, bifurcating so that you can view that uncertainty as an opportunity. All right, so the second one that you've identified, and I think is an interesting one to talk about, harness the emotions of others. And can you talk a little bit about what you mean by harnessing the emotions of others? Because it's necessarily about taking advantage of people, but rather, how do you in fact see emotion and the connection of emotion to uncertainty as an opportunity?
Well, let me tell you, what we found also is that the more comfortable you are with uncertainty, the more emotional intelligence you have. Because there's nothing more uncertain than people's emotions. And so we're living in a world today where a very key part of resilience is your emotional intelligence. And more companies are realizing that this is critical. And this is from every angle that you look at. Let me give you one angle, for example. Much of innovation today is the user experience. When you're talking to millennials, about 50% of them prefer the user experience to the actual product. And why is that? Because we're living in a world today where young people, and everybody, but in particular young people, everybody is looking for meaning in their lives. And if you want to give people meaning in their lives, you have to give them something that gives them meaning. People are more concerned about how you make them feel than what you're doing or how you're doing it. It's like the Simon Sinek stuff. It's the why, because the why is what gives people meaning. I mean, you take your average secretary in Japan, she makes $40,000 a year, but she's got a Louis Vuitton bag and a Rolex watch that together are worth more than $10,000. Can she afford that? No, but she needs it. It's not just status, it gives them meaning. And that's why luxury is such a key factor today in so many people's lives. But from all these big companies, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Alexa, all these things that we're doing out there, it's all about giving people meaning. And if you can create user experiences that give people meaning, you're going to get customers and you'll be able to build solid relationships with them. I mean, look at here, here's my iPhone. People ask me, do you have a relationship with your iPhone? Sure I do. It's like my dumb brother. It doesn't have to be the best phone in the world or the fastest phone. But you know what? I have a relationship with my iPhone. So harnessing people's emotions is about being able to give them meaning and understanding what gives people meaning. And that's why, we need young people to really develop their emotional intelligence. And you can do that in a professional setting. It's a lot harder in a personal setting, but you can learn emotional intelligence at work.
Absolutely. This is something that we know we can do training on, and there's a lot of opportunities in those spaces. I think it's also a very important point when you're talking about user experience. For many entrepreneurs, you're so product focused. What are the features of the product? What's my MVP? Kind of going along through your checklist, and it's often easy to forget about that user experience, and that the sale of product is more about value creation for your customer than it is about a checklist of awesome features that you can provide to them. And even for B2B customers, you're still dealing with an individual in procurement. Someone has to sign on and say, yes, this is the product I want. This is the relationship I want. And so whether you're a B2C or a B2B business, I think this of the emotions of others is a very powerful thing that we have to remember, and absolutely increase our resilience as an entrepreneur and the resilience of our business. All right, so the next thing that you highlight in this list of 5. So first was see opportunity and uncertainty, and I'll continue to repeat these so we kind of go through these 5. The second was harness the emotions of others. The third, making sure you know whether you're a missionary, mercenary in your mindset, and which one you are and which one provides a more resilient approach. So missionary versus mercenary, what do you mean?
Okay, and I think this goes back to the why, Simon Sinek's why, in the sense that, people are not interested in what you do or how you do it, but why you do what you do. And, like I said, a lot of people in the world are Friday people. They don't like what they do. And so they're going from paycheck to paycheck. Now, when you love what you do, it doesn't feel like work. And that's why, entrepreneurs have this mindset of resilience, where the strength for that resilience is beyond, something external. It's intrinsic. You have this mission that you're committed to doing something. And so I always ask people, are you a mercenary or a missionary? Because if you're a mercenary, you're only doing it for the money. And what are you going to do when the money runs out? We're living in a society today, and this applies not just for entrepreneurship. I think it also applies to a lot of relationships between people. We're living in a society today where everybody wants instant gratification. And the day they don't get it, the day that they don't get this, it's like, I've had enough of this relationship, or I've had enough of this job, and they change. And so you need to decide for yourself, what is it that gives meaning in your life in order to do the things that you want to do? And then you need to decide for yourself how you're going to approach this. Because just like in entrepreneurship, you can't tell an investor that you're only doing it for the money. It's the same with everything. If you're looking for a job and you want to interview at a job at a big company like Procter & Gamble, you're not going to show up there and say, and they ask you, why do you want to work here? Oh, it's the money.
Yeah. No, it's not that being an entrepreneur can't be a very, very profitable enterprise, right? But we find, because obviously there are many entrepreneurs here in Silicon Valley that have done very well. But you're right, that this mindset of one saying, this is my mission, and yes, one of the outcomes of it is that I may be wildly successful, but you're right, there will be very big highs and very deep lows on any entrepreneurial journey. And so when we talk about resilience of mindset, by changing from this idea that rather than a paycheck, a TGIF, I'm a TGIM. And thank goodness it's Monday, because I'm back to doing what I love to do. And this, I think this difference between doing it for the money versus doing it for the passion, like almost like a religious missionary, right? To say, yeah, you don't do it for the money. You do it because it's your love in life, and that's a very powerful approach to developing a very resilient mindset to the roller coaster ride of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and so just to close on this one, Mike, if you told, if an investor gives you $100,000 to do your startup, if you're only doing it for the money, what are you going to do when you run out of money? You're going to quit.
And an investor wants somebody who's going to find the next check.
Exactly. It took Steve Jobs 2 years to raise his first money. And so this is what people want to see, resilience. And like I said, this applies today, not just in entrepreneurship, but in all walks of life. If you start a relationship where, it's only something that, is not going to last forever, then that relationship is not going to last forever. And so
Indeed.
There has to be something deeper here.
Yeah. So, I want to hit a couple of the questions that are coming in here. So related to all of this, some folks, what tactic can help to embrace uncertainty? What tricks and tips and devices would you recommend? And my thoughts on this, one of them, of course, is this bifurcation, to understand that uncertainty in your personal life and your comfort with it versus uncertainty or comfort in your professional life can be two very different things. And just that alone is a wonderful device for helping you think about your relationship with uncertainty and developing a more resilient mindset. The other thing that you've said is that comfort with uncertainty is a muscle. And like every muscle, it must be exercised. It must be focused on. It must be, worked out. And so the notion of, just like going to the gym every day, there's no trick or shortcut to having a healthy physique, right? No, you got to do your work and it's consistent. The kinds of things that I can think would be good is, to come closer, learn a foreign language, do something outside of your normal comfort zone every day to push that boundary, to kind of keep working that muscle. It doesn't have to be big things. It can be small things in either one of the portions of your life. Are there other ways that that you can think of that can help folks try to embrace this uncertainty in a very sort of real way?
Like I said, it's a muscle. Let me give you another example. I had class this morning here at IE, and they were all telling me, how do we increase our emotional intelligence? And I said to them, in your work groups, you got 8 of you in a work group. And every one of you in that work group, all 8 of you are coming from different cultures, different nationalities. When you're dealing with people that are diverse every day, your muscle is increasing. You're becoming more emotionally intelligent. You're dealing, and emotional intelligence is a lot about uncertainty because you don't know how other cultures behave. You don't know what's important to them. All these things create uncertainty. And so the more you get used to them, the more you're thrown into the pool, the better. And so, one way is to move people around in different departments, send them to another country. Yeah, you name it. There are many different ways to do this, to grow this muscle.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so getting back to our list, right? We had see opportunity, uncertainty, harness the emotion of others, know whether you're a missionary or mercenary. The next one you have listed here is know your strengths and your weaknesses. And I think this has a lot more to do with confidence and the role that self-confidence has in your relationship with uncertainty than anything else. But I'd like to hear your thought. Know your strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. We talk a lot about strengths and weaknesses. And, for most people, they have a hard time measuring this. And so what we're doing now with the research is we're actually measuring a person across several dimensions. One is their comfort with uncertainty, which we can measure now. And just like you can measure, someone's IQ or the temperature, whether someone has fever or not, we're getting to the point where we can actually measure how comfortable a person is with uncertainty in their personal and their professional life. Now, beyond that, there are other things you need to measure in terms of strengths and weaknesses. One of them is personality traits, okay? And that's another thing we're starting to measure. And obviously, emotional intelligence. And so if you could get to the point where you would have like a dashboard, and this is essentially what we're calling it, where you could look and see a snapshot of where you are in the different elements that have to do with either competencies, traits, emotional intelligence, comfort with uncertainty, you will have a better idea of yourself and the things that you need to develop. You see, you cannot have a one-stop shop here, one size fits all. Everybody is different. And this is very important, you know, because, for example, we're now going into companies where we're actually seeing, for example, in one company, most of the people, we looked at different departments, most of the people that were more comfortable with uncertainty were in the accounting department. And you were like, now, why do we need that? And so it's very important to understand people's comfort with uncertainty and their strengths and weaknesses. And I think we need to start measuring that, and people need to start understanding and taking ownership of their personal development roadmap. Can't be just the companies. Individuals need to take ownership of that, because knowing your strengths and weaknesses is going to be critical in differentiating yourself in the future.
Indeed, indeed. So you know, a number of questions. Oh, let's actually get the checklist, and so knowing your strengths and your weaknesses, who you are as a person, being able to actually create these, you know, metrics and viewpoints is an important part, because as you know, whoever said it, Peter Drucker, Jack Welch, you name it, you know, if you can measure it, you can manage it. And so that's an important component of this. And so, you know, that's where that dashboard of being able to now for the first time be able to help individuals measure their level of comfort with uncertainty, see how their relationship with uncertainty is different in their professional and personal lives. And that's really, I think, a breakthrough in this area where you're absolutely leading the cutting edge of research in this space. You know, so the fifth one, right? And I think this goes to one of the questions that was asked by one of the participants when they asked how much of your background in sales and marketing and other things has helped you in your journey. The fifth piece, right? First was opportunity in uncertainty, harness the emotions of others, missionary versus mercenary, know your strengths and weaknesses, and the last is see yourself as a salesperson. Entrepreneurial life is one long pitch. And so what do you mean when you say that? And how do you think that relates to your background in sales?
Yeah, this is critical. I truly believe that your life is a continuous pitch. You're always selling yourself, and you need to make the right impression quickly. One word that I think doesn't get enough credit in the world today is the word rhetoric. Logos, ethos, and pathos. And so we're surrounded by people that think that you can live the world with logos only, which is to make rational statements about things and, you know, logic. But the reality is that, you know, you have logos, which is rational statements, ethos, which is your credibility, and pathos, which is, and those are the three elements of rhetoric, the emotions that you stir in others. And so this goes back to meaning. People aren't interested in what you tell them. It's how you make them feel. And so when you are talking to people, you need to inspire them. Steve Jobs, the former Steve Jobs, for example, he was amazing at inspiring people. He could have got up in Las Vegas. Remember Las Vegas 2008, 2009? He could have got up and said, you see this device? It's going to allow you to search the web, you know, write emails and look at pictures and talk. He could have said that. That would have been 100% logos. But what did he say? He said, do you see this device? It's going to change your life. And millions of people believed him. when you're living in a world like we are today, and it's going to get worse, where people don't want rational messages. They want messages that make them feel better, that give their lives meaning. You're going to have to know how to sell. You're going to have to know how to stir their emotions. You're going to have to know how to lead, how to inspire. And that takes emotional intelligence. And that's a critical part of business today.
And the relationship that idea has with resilience is, if you have deep within you the ability to communicate on a very, very intense level with your customers, with your team, with everyone around you, you will be able to make it through those low points, and you will be able to manage it through those high points. That sort of brings us to the end of the 5, right? So opportunity and uncertainty, harnessing the emotions of others, missionary versus mercenary mindsets, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and seeing yourself as a salesperson. And what, again, were those 3 components of rhetoric that you thought were so important, just so folks can write them down?
Logos, the rational, the logic; ethos, your credibility; and pathos, the emotions that you stir in the audience.
Awesome.
See,
yeah, those are great points to help us break it down.
Yeah, when we hear the word rhetoric, we always think of, Julius Caesar, Ronald Reagan, maybe stuff like that.
Cicero. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but the reality is that 99% of our world is rhetoric. Only algebra, maybe physics, I don't know, you know more about physics than I do, but everything is socially constructed. So economics, you name it. And so it's very important to teach young people early to be able to use pathos to their advantage, and to use it to communicate, because people need that today. They need to be inspired.
Yeah. Oh, indeed. All right, I want to get to a few questions, and we'll look to keep our discussion between you and I reasonably short, so that we can hit a few of these, because I know we can talk about these topics for hours on end. So failure is a big part of the entrepreneurial experience, and overcoming failure and seeing it as a stepping stone to your ultimate goal versus the end of the line, so to speak, is something that every entrepreneur has to start to come to terms with. And how do you see that as part of resilience? And I guess for me, it connects somewhat to this missionary versus mercenary mindset, and whether or not you have the fortitude, resilience to push through.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you, Mike. This is about why you do what you do. If you're a mercenary, as soon as you don't have that instant gratification, the money's there, you're going to quit. And so failure is critical, because you learn from failure. And that's why so many investors actually, they like to see that someone has failed several times, because you're going to learn that way. I'll never forget, I had a student of mine from Israel, and he started a startup, raised $1.5 million. After 2 years, he lost all the money of his investors. So he started another startup. Guess where he went? He went back to the same investors. And they invested in him, because they said, this guy has learned. And so, this is part of the resilience that you build up by learning through doing and failing.
Well, and as long as that failure is not due to your personal, your personal actions, fraud, things like this, there are myriad ways and pathways for a startup to fail, and it sort of goes back to that who you are as a person, and making sure that that's okay. You had talked a little bit about teaching young people rhetoric and the components of rhetoric, and how to be a better communicator, whether that's a salesperson or whether that's a team leader. One of the questions came in from a participant, said, I'm 17. What do you think can help me grow as an entrepreneur? And I love this question, because I love the fact that young people are interested in this topic and they want to know how to make themselves better. So Paris, I want you to go back to 17-year-old Paris de L'Etraz, and what would you have told yourself to say, what do you think you do to grow as an entrepreneur right now?
When I was 17, I was delivering the Los Angeles Times every morning, getting up at 5 in the morning, putting rubber bands around each paper, and then getting out there on my bike and hitting the neighborhood in the dark.
I had a paper route too. Great job.
Yeah. So at 17, you need to start getting out of your comfort zone. I think you need to learn about rhetoric and things like that. But I think at 17, the most important thing is, and they did a lot of research about this. In London, they took 5-year-old kids, and they saw that at 5 years old, 92% of them were creative. And then they followed those 5-year-old kids until they were 15. And at that point, only 17% were creative. What happens to us between the ages of 5 and 15? Education. It puts us in a box. And so if I was 17 years old, I would want to realize that we are being trained for a predictable world in school. And the world is more and more uncertain. And now that's not going to change anytime soon. So I would be doing things that get me out of my comfort zone. I would be trying to get much more used to uncertainty. I would do things, it's like if you need to feel the pain. You got to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. That's how you grow.
And once again, we go back to that analogy to the muscle, right? No pain, no gain. Everybody knows that those first few days after you start to go to the gym, or January 2nd and 3rd after you make that New Year's resolution to work out and run every day or whatever it might be, those are painful days, physically painful, because you're starting to grow that muscle. But then, as all of us have experienced, after a few weeks, after a few months, the pain is gone. And in many regards, there's a yearning for that activity, for that continued development and growth. And after not working out for a couple of days, you're like, man, I really have to go and do this. And I think that speaks towards this resilience in mindset, in that you become not only used to being comfortable with uncertainty and managing it, but that you, once again, see it as an opportunity and you want to grow in that space. But it goes back to that analogy of the muscle.
Right.
Absolutely. All right. So look, you grew up in LA. That in itself is its own culture. So then you go to Boston, you move to Manhattan, you then go to London. You deal a lot with Asian cultures, doing your sort of sports marketing, bringing European football clubs to Japan for friendlies. Now you're in Spain. One of the questions that comes up is, how do cultural influences, interact with 5 points? And are these 5 points, to some extent, pan-cultural, or do some of them really change a bit if you're dealing in a different culture? And your breadth of experience in dealing with various cultures, I think, is helpful to try to understand.
Yeah, that's a very good question. A lot of people ask me, are you a citizen of the world or what? And let me tell you, your identity is very important, I think. And I think during COVID, our identities were even more reinforced. I understand lots of cultures. I have a lot of emotional intelligence professionally. But for me, my identity as an American is critical. It's one of those things that gives you meaning in your life. And I think that we should, not respect, but we should realize that our identities are an important part of who we are. And at the same time, we need to be able to embrace other cultures. We need to be able to embrace diversity. And part of that is having the emotional intelligence to not judge other people, but to see the richness in the different cultures. And I think that's part of the resilience. We're living in a world today that's more global than ever. It's local and global. And that's not going to go away, I think. And I think that's part of our strength, because our identity is what also gives us internal meaning. But I think culture is a very important factor here, being able to understand all these different cultures, because it's a muscle. The more different cultures that you're exposed to, the better. I mean, for the first time, I went to Baku a couple of weeks ago. And people might ask, well, where the hell is Baku? I didn't know where it was. But I thought, I got to go there because it's a new place. And sure enough, amazing country, Azerbaijan, amazing people. And I feel richer from being exposed to that culture. And so I think, we need to embrace culture. We don't, it's not about being afraid of being exposed to other cultures. It's, you need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, because then it becomes comfortable and you're a better person that way.
Yeah. All right. Last question before we wrap up our webinar. And before I ask it, I want to just once again thank you for joining us from across the both North America and the Atlantic today to talk about this fascinating topic that we don't think about nearly enough when we talk about entrepreneurship. Often we'll talk about the technical challenges of the product. We'll talk about the financial challenges of raising money. We'll talk about all these things, but often we lose, the viewpoint that every single one of those steps involves people, and that's an important component to this. And the other thing I would say is, for those that are thinking about doing some of our programs at Stanford, one of our frameworks on how to think about building a company, so much of it starts with team, and team's about people. And so I think that this topic of your resilience as an entrepreneur and how you relate to uncertainty in your professional and personal life is so important. All right, so the final question, and I think it's a fun one. You had mentioned that you were on Wall Street during the 1980s. What's your favorite Hollywood movie about Wall Street in that time or elsewhere? And what character would you have played?
Oh, boy, you got me there. Leonardo DiCaprio.
Ooh. Wolf of Wall Street.
Yes. But I want to make a final point, Mike, on people, because this is important. There's a great book that I didn't write. I don't have any shares in it, written by the Gallup organization called It's the Manager. And what they say in that book is that we're living in a world today where about 80% of the people are not engaged in their jobs. They're what I call Friday people. They're looking forward to the weekend. Now, we cannot live in a world where 80% of the people are not engaged in their jobs. Because, like I said, 40% of our life is work. And that's why entrepreneurship is so critical, because a lot of people, when they become entrepreneurs, they become Monday people and they love their jobs. But the reality is that most of the world are not going to be entrepreneurs. And so we need to help people get engaged in their jobs. And that's part of the work that we're doing, is in looking at, this dashboard is essentially to try to understand people better and see within their work environments how we can get them to become more engaged. And what this book says, in the 20 years of research of the Gallup organization, is that it's the manager. The manager is the reason why people are not engaged in their jobs. Our managers need to be better coaches. They need to be better mentors. That is what is going to give us the inspiration, the motivation to be much more engaged in our jobs. And I think that's a critical component. It's all about people, whether it's in the team, in a startup, or a team in a company. You need to be a Monday person. You need to love Mondays. Life is way too short to be a Friday person the rest of your life. And so I think we need to do more. And this is an area that we're starting to spend a lot of time on, is helping companies get their employees to become much more engaged through teaching, managers to become better mentors, coaches, and the like. So I just want to part with that. You need to love Mondays.
No, I think it's a great point. One of the ways to do that is to not go into the week uncertain and fearful. but rather to see it as an opportunity, kind of going back to what we had said. All right, I want to thank you once again. We tried to get to as many questions as we could. Of course, we can't get to all of them, and I want to thank all of our participants for putting their questions in. I tried to get to as many as possible while allowing us to go into the depth that we wanted to. So thank you once again, Professor de L'Etraz.